The quiet panic. You know that feeling when you take a job just to pay the bills? When you tell yourself it's temporary just until something better comes along? Well, I thought working the night shift at Riverside County Morgue would be exactly that. Easy money, quiet work, and hey, the dead don't complain, right? But sometimes the jobs we think are temporary end up changing our lives forever. And in my case, they almost ended it. I'm about to tell you the most terrifying experience of my entire life. Something that happened to me just 3 months ago that still keeps me awake at night. By the end of this story, you'll understand why I quit that job after just 2 weeks and why I'll never step foot in another morgue again. But first, let me explain how I ended up in this nightmare in the first place. My name's Marcus, and I was 22, fresh out of college with a degree in criminal justice that apparently meant nothing to potential employers. I'd been job hunting for 6 months, living in my parents' basement, watching my savings account hit zero. That's when my Uncle Tony, who worked as a supervisor at the county morgue, threw me a lifeline. He said they needed someone for the overnight shift, someone reliable who could handle the administrative side of things. Filing paperwork, maintaining records, basically babysitting dead bodies while the real professionals were at home sleeping. The pay was decent, better than anything else I'd been offered, and the hours were perfect for someone who was naturally a night owl anyway. Tony assured me it would be simple work. He said the hardest part would be staying awake, not dealing with anything scary. Dead people can't hurt you, he told me. They're just sleeping forever. God, I wish he'd been right. My first week on the job was exactly what Tony promised. Quiet, boring, almost meditative. The morgue was located in the basement of the county medical building, a sterile maze of white hallways and fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. My job was to monitor the intake area, process any bodies that came in during the night, and make sure everything was properly documented for the day shift. Most nights, nothing happened at all. I'd sit at my desk, catch up on Netflix, maybe organize some files. The bodies just lay there in their cold storage units, silent and still. But everything changed on my 8th night, when I switched shifts with another guy named Derek, who usually worked Thursdays. Derek had called in sick, some stomach bug that was going around, and Tony asked if I could cover for him. I didn't think twice about it. A shift was a shift, right? Same building, same job, same dead people who couldn't bother anyone. That's when I learned that not all nights at the morgue are created equal. It started around 2 in the morning. I was filling out intake forms for 3 bodies that had come in earlier that evening when I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was subtle at first, just a soft tapping sound coming from somewhere deeper in the facility. Tap, tap, tap. Like someone gently knocking on wood, but rhythmic, almost musical. I stopped writing and listened carefully. The sound continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped completely. I convinced myself it was just the building settling, or maybe some pipes expanding and contracting. Old buildings make weird noises, especially at night when everything's quiet. I went back to my paperwork, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about tonight. 20 minutes later, the tapping started again. This time it was louder, more insistent, and it seemed to be coming from the direction of the cold storage units. I grabbed my flashlight and walked down the main hallway, following the sound. The morgue had 3 separate storage areas, each one holding about 20 units. As I got closer to the first storage room, the tapping stopped again. I stood there in the doorway, shining my light across the rows of metal doors, each one marked with a number and a small placard showing whether it was occupied or empty. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly the way it should. But the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. That's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. One of the storage unit doors was slightly ajar. Just a crack, maybe an inch or 2, but enough to see that it wasn't properly sealed. These doors were designed to stay locked tight, both for temperature control and to prevent any accidents. There was no way one should just be hanging open like that. I walked over to unit number 17 and pulled the door open completely. Inside was a middle-aged woman, probably in her 50s, with graying hair and pale, waxy skin. According to the placard, her name was Margaret Holloway, and she'd been brought in 2 days earlier after a heart attack. She looked peaceful, like she was just sleeping, her hands folded neatly across her chest. But here's the thing that still gives me chills when I think about it. As I was reaching to close the door, I could have sworn I saw her chest rise and fall. Just once. A small, almost imperceptible breath. I froze, my hand still on the door handle, staring at her face. Her eyes were closed, her expression serene, but for just a moment I was absolutely convinced she had taken a breath. I slammed the door shut and practically ran back to my desk. My hands were shaking as I checked the intake records again. Margaret Holloway, 53 years old, deceased from cardiac arrest, pronounced dead at Riverside General Hospital at 3:47 p.m. on Tuesday. There was no mistake. She was dead. She had been dead for 2 days, but that image of her chest moving stayed with me for the rest of the night. I kept telling myself it was my imagination, that working alone in a morgue was just messing with my head. Night shift workers see things that aren't there all the time. It's practically a job hazard. Around 4 in the morning, I decided to make my rounds again just to double check that all the storage units were properly secured. I walked through each room methodically, testing every door, making sure the temperature controls were working correctly. Everything seemed normal until I got to the 3rd storage room. Unit number 32 was open again. Not just cracked this time, but wide open, the fluorescent light inside casting an eerie glow across the contents. This time it was a young man, maybe 25 years old, with dark hair and a tattoo of an eagle on his left shoulder. The placard read, "Jason Martinez, brought in after a motorcycle accident the previous evening." But as I approached the unit to close the door, something made me stop dead in my tracks. Jason's eyes were open, wide open, staring directly at me with an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't the blank, lifeless stare you'd expect from a corpse. There was something behind those eyes, something that looked almost like recognition, like he knew who I was. I backed away from the unit, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it echoing in the empty hallway. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't some trick of the light or a case of nerves. A dead man was looking at me, and somehow, impossibly, he seemed to know me. That's when I heard the tapping again, but this time it wasn't coming from just one location. It was coming from multiple units throughout the storage room, a symphony of gentle knocking that seemed to be getting louder and more coordinated with each passing second. And then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper but clear as day, I heard Jason Martinez speak. "Marcus," he said, his lips barely moving, his dead eyes still locked on mine. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall behind me as every rational thought in my head screamed that this couldn't be happening. Dead people don't talk. Dead people don't open their eyes and call you by name. But Jason Martinez was doing exactly that. His pale lips moving in slow, deliberate words that seemed to echo off the sterile walls. "You switched with Derek tonight," he continued, his voice hollow and distant like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "We knew you would eventually. We've been waiting so long to see you again." Again? I'd never seen this man before in my life. I'd never seen any of these people before they ended up on metal slabs in this godforsaken place. But as I stood there, paralyzed with terror, more voices began to join his. Soft whispers coming from units all around the room. A chorus of the dead that grew louder and more distinct with each passing moment. "Marcus is here," came a woman's voice from Unit 15. "Finally, Marcus is here." "We remember you," said another voice, this one from a unit I couldn't even see. "We remember everything." The tapping was getting more frantic now, coming from dozens of units throughout the morgue. It sounded like they were all trying to get out, all trying to break free from their cold metal prisons. I wanted to run, every instinct in my body screaming at me to get out of there as fast as possible. But my legs felt like they were made of concrete. That's when Margaret Holloway's voice cut through the chaos, clearer and stronger than the rest. "You don't remember us, do you, Marcus? But we remember you. We remember the accident. The accident." The words hit me like a physical blow, bringing back memories I'd spent years trying to bury. Suddenly, I was 17 years old again, behind the wheel of my dad's car on a rainy October night. I'd been drinking at a party, just a few beers, nothing major. I thought I was fine to drive. I thought I could make it home without anyone knowing. I never saw the other car coming through the intersection. Never saw the family of 4 who were just trying to get home from dinner at their grandmother's house. The impact was so sudden, so violent that I barely remembered it happening. One moment I was fumbling with the radio, and the next moment I was hanging upside down in a ditch, sirens wailing in the distance. The other driver, a man named Robert Chen, died instantly. His wife Linda lasted 3 hours in the ICU before succumbing to her injuries. Their 2 children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old David, never made it out of the emergency room. I walked away with a concussion and a broken wrist. The blood alcohol test came back just under the legal limit, and somehow, through a combination of good lawyers and bad weather conditions, I avoided any serious charges. Reckless driving, a suspended license, community service. That was it. 4 people died because of my stupidity, and I got a slap on the wrist. I'd convinced myself over the years that it wasn't really my fault. That the rain made the road slippery. That the other driver should have seen me coming. That it was just a tragic accident that could have happened to anyone. But standing there in that morgue, listening to the voices of the dead, I knew the truth I'd been running from for 5 years. "You killed us, Marcus," came a small voice from the far corner of the room. It was high-pitched, innocent, the voice of a child. "You killed all of us, and then you forgot about us." I spun around, searching for the source of the voice, and saw Unit 47 standing wide open. Inside was a little girl with blonde pigtails and a pink dress, her small hands folded across her chest. Emma Chen. Even after all these years, I recognized her face from the newspaper photos that had haunted my dreams. "We've been waiting for you to come back," she continued, her dead eyes fixed on mine. "Waiting for you to remember what you did to us." More units began opening throughout the morgue, revealing the faces of people I'd tried so hard to forget. Robert Chen, his neck bent at an unnatural angle from the impact. Linda Chen, her face pale and serene despite the massive trauma to her chest. Little David Chen, who looked like he was just taking a nap. But it wasn't just them. As I looked around the room in growing horror, I realized that every body in the morgue was somehow connected to me. The motorcycle accident victim, Jason Martinez. I'd been the drunk driver who ran the red light and T-boned his bike 3 years ago. Margaret Holloway, the heart attack victim. She was the mother of a girl I'd hit with my car during my senior year of high school. A girl who survived but whose mother never recovered from the stress and grief. Every person in that morgue, every voice calling my name, was someone whose death I'd caused through my reckless, selfish actions. Car accidents, hit and runs, a drunk driving incident I'd managed to cover up with my family's money and influence. A trail of bodies that followed me wherever I went, victims of my inability to take responsibility for my actions. "You thought you could just keep running," Robert Chen said, his voice calm but filled with an otherworldly authority. "Moving to new towns, starting over, pretending like we never existed. But the dead don't forget, Marcus. We never forget." The temperature in the room began to drop rapidly. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the air as the voices grew louder and more insistent. The fluorescent light started flickering, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. "We've been calling to you," Linda Chen whispered. "Every night in your dreams we've been trying to reach you, but you always wake up. You always run away." That's when I realized why Derek had really called in sick, why Tony had been so eager to get me to cover this specific shift. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't random. Somehow the dead had orchestrated this entire situation, manipulating events to get me alone in this place where the barrier between the living and the dead was thinnest. "What do you want from me?" I screamed, my voice echoing off the walls. "I can't bring you back. I can't undo what happened." Emma Chen's small voice cut through my panic like a knife. "We don't want to come back, Marcus. We want you to come with us." The lights went out completely, plunging the morgue into absolute darkness. In the blackness, I could hear the sound of metal doors slamming open throughout the facility, followed by the soft shuffle of footsteps on the cold tile floor. They were getting out, all of them, moving toward me in the darkness with purpose and intent. I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to navigate toward the exit, but every hallway looked the same in the pale blue glow. The footsteps were getting closer, accompanied by whispers and soft laughter that seemed to come from every direction at once. That's when I saw her standing directly in front of the exit door. A teenage girl with long brown hair and a prom dress that was torn and stained with blood. Sarah Mitchell, the girl I'd hit outside the school dance 2 years ago. I'd been texting while driving, never even saw her crossing the street. "You can't leave, Marcus," she said, her head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Not until you pay for what you've done to all of us." I tried to push past her, but her hand shot out with impossible speed, grabbing my wrist with fingers that felt like ice. Her grip was stronger than any living person's, and as she held me there, the other victims began to emerge from the darkness. Robert and Linda Chen, their children, Jason Martinez, Margaret Holloway, and dozens of others I'd killed over the years through my reckless behavior. They formed a circle around me, their dead eyes reflecting the light from my phone like mirrors. In that moment, I finally understood the true weight of what I'd done. These weren't just statistics or newspaper headlines. They were real people with families, dreams, futures that I'd stolen from them through my selfishness and cowardice. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry for what I did to all of you." Emma Chen stepped forward, her small hand reaching up to touch my cheek. Her skin was cold as winter, but her touch was surprisingly gentle. "Sorry isn't enough, Marcus," she said, "but it's a start." The circle began to close around me, and I felt my phone slip from my trembling fingers, plunging us all back into darkness. This was it. This was how I was going to die, surrounded by the ghosts of my victims in the basement of a county morgue. Part of me felt like I deserved it, but just as their cold hands began to reach for me, the emergency lighting system kicked in, bathing the hallway in a red glow. The sudden light seemed to startle the spirits, causing them to step back and giving me the opening I needed to break free from Sarah's grip. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the exit door and up the stairs to the main level of the medical building. Behind me, I could hear them calling my name, but their voices grew fainter with each step I took away from that cursed basement. I burst through the front doors of the building and into the cool morning air, gasping and sobbing as the first rays of sunlight began to appear on the horizon. I never went back for my things. I never spoke to Uncle Tony again. I just got in my car and drove as far away from that place as I could. That was 3 months ago, and I haven't had a single drink since that night. I've been going to therapy, attending support groups for people who've caused fatal accidents. I've reached out to the families of my victims, trying to make amends where possible, accepting responsibility for the pain I've caused. I know now that the dead at the morgue weren't trying to drag me to hell. They were trying to force me to face the truth about myself, to stop running from the consequences of my actions. In their own terrifying way, they were trying to save me from becoming an even worse person than I already was. I still have nightmares about that night, but they're different now. Instead of running from the voices of my victims, I listen to them. I remember their names, their faces, their stories. Because that's the least I can do for the people whose lives I destroyed. The dead don't forget. And now, finally, neither do I.